My name is Adrian Nantchev, and this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. So this podcast is all about bringing people from around the world, whether entrepreneurs or not, to share with you their experience, their story, and their inspiration. Today I have with me Kody Fowler. So please, Kody, tell the world, what is your story, and why are you doing what you're currently doing?
I think I'll start with, grew up in the suburbs, regular childhood, nothing special. Grew up pretty conservative. Graduated high school, then joined the Marine Corps, which I'll get into maybe a little bit later. And since probably 2011, 2012, I got really into Ron Paul during the election season. And he introduced me to libertarianism, which is a belief about property rights and not aggressing against one another. So I got really into libertarianism, the Libertarian Party, and things like that. A few years later, I evolved a little bit, and I believe in voluntarism, and that is where all human interaction is completely voluntary, as opposed to through force or threat of force and coercion. So without a need for a state, without a need for a government, without the need for force and coercion, we can achieve a completely voluntary, prosperous society. So things through the free market, we can provide necessary goods and services. So that's what I've been kind of fighting for the past couple of years now. I'm still in the Marine Corps, so that's got me into a little bit of hot water. Here's one of my uniforms, if you don't believe me. But that's what I've been fighting for. It's gotten me into some hot water in my job. But I've kind of disregarded that, and I've got to keeping on doing what I'm doing, regardless of the consequences, whether it be good or bad. But that's main. That's I don't have much more to say about myself in general.
All right. So why is it you're doing what you're currently doing?
Because I think it's one of the most important things is how many people believe that what we have now is completely necessary, and it's a little frustrating at times, but it really is very important to me that we achieve a voluntary society based on property rights and liberty. Seeing how everyone's rights are infringed upon every single day is pretty frustrating as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you alluded to it just then, but what is wrong with the status quo?
What's wrong with the status quo now is that the existence of the government in and of itself infringes on your rights to liberty and property. Because if they say you can't do something but you disagree with it, then there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, if they say you can't put this chemical in your body, you have to obey. And if you don't, they're going to fine you, they're going to throw you in a cage, and if you refuse that, then they're going to do whatever they can.
But what is wrong with that? Because not everyone knows what's the right chemical to put in, or not everyone knows that what they should be doing. Don't you think the state knows better?
I do not think the state knows better. I think people should be able to put whatever chemical they choose in their body, whether it's heroin or something as simple as marijuana. I think if someone wants to destroy their own life and put whatever they want in their body, they have the right to do that. People own their own bodies, and telling them they can't put something in their own body is saying, your body is my property, you'll do with it what I say.
So right now, are you particularly active in advocating marijuana legalization or hemp cultivation?
I target the drug war in general more than I advocate for pot legalization. I'm not a big fan of legalization. I'm actually more of a fan of decriminalization, because one thing, the legalizing is the government telling you, we're going to let you do this. Decriminalization is saying, it's your choice, do whatever you want. there is a difference. One is analogous to like licensing and permits. If you want to drive on a road you pay for and a car you pay for, you have to give the state a piece of paper that says, I know how to drive. So I think that's also wrong.
Wait, so just clarify then. So you're in favour of decriminalisation because
yes,
it's much more standoffish from the government's point of view.
Right. Decriminalization is saying you have the right to do this if you want to do it. Legalization is saying this is a privilege we're giving you. We have to write a bill or a law saying, okay, you can do this, which I disagree with.
Oh, I see. Subtle difference indeed. And you mentioned a license to drive a car as well. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't believe in licenses or permits for anything, because, and I mean that's not how the government was even supposed to be, and that's just how it is now. But you're not supposed to have to pay for licenses and permits and permission from the state to hunt deer on a certain season, permission from the state to own a weapon, permission to drive on a road or whatever you need licenses for, like fishing. There's all kinds of barriers and restrictions there.
Yeah, here in the UK, we have to have a license. You would like this. We have to have
a TV license.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know all about that.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
How did you know I was going to mention that?
Well, I mean, as soon as you said you're from the UK, I kind of deduced, because I've heard about the TV license before, and I thought it was the craziest thing that you need a license for that. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, well, the loophole or the restrictions really is that you need a license only if you're watching live television, whether international or national, broadcasted, but also to not need a license to justify it is you won't need the boxes or the TiVo kind of equivalent boxes. If you don't have that, then by de facto you don't need the license. And the way to prove that is you have the goons coming into the house to physically prove it's there, and I wouldn't be surprised if they check again 6 months later spontaneously. But if you ain't got those devices, there's no real need to have the license at all, provided you're not watching it online as well, like in BBC iPlayer. So really, it's like a government-sponsored racketeering, because it's a civil court, it's a civil case, but it can escalate into a criminal case where the police are involved. And I believe that loophole was closed over the past few years, where you could have a TV but not actually watch any live broadcasts and get away with it. So I believe that was closed lately.
That's pretty insane.
It is. It is. So done away with that. But with regards to libertarianism and all that, what are you doing about it? How are you sharing that message to the world? How are you teaching, and how are you enlightening, or how are you reassuring people?
Mainly an online debate. I'm not doing much of I'm not doing much of like voting or protesting was the word I was looking for. I'm more challenging people's beliefs online and in person, and especially in the Marine Corps, it's pretty difficult because they're pretty conservative. The military as a whole is pretty conservative.
Wouldn't you say debate? Like what subjects or what platforms or whereabouts really?
I'll debate any subject. Any subject that has to do with property rights or liberty or anything. I'll debate you about copyright, about the medical industry, licenses, mandatory insurance, anything. The free market is a pretty central point of my debates, though.
Yeah, but generally speaking, I'm not too fond of mandatory insurance in general here in the UK. But IP, now, this is interesting with intellectual property. I've heard it's quote-unquote evil, and I've heard that it suppresses innovation with regards to, in the States, they're called IP troll companies, where these companies own loads of IP, and they will sue another company that has a very similar intellectual property because one of their existing patents and IPs they own is very loosely and broadly defined. Now, I think in that case it's bad and evil, but don't you think from intellectual property is good? Because if I create something, artwork or an invention or a song, for example, this certain configuration of information or intellectual property, no one can just go out there and create the exact same thing. You know, I created this. This is mine. And if you want to use the same kind of device or software, you owe me a royalty, or you owe me a Creative Commons, permission or attribution.
I understand why people feel that IP is necessary, but I disagree entirely with patents and copyrights and reserving rights and things like that for IP, because there's a difference between theft and copying. If I take a copy of something, I've not stolen anything. You still have the original. Not to mention that ideas aren't property. So if I'm in South Africa and you're in Greenland, and if you create one thing but get the copyright on it, and I create the same exact thing without even ever knowing about your project, I can still get into trouble for it. But mainly it's that copying is not theft. I'm not removing the original from your possession, which is the definition of theft.
Interesting. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay, interesting. All right.
Yeah. When I first saw, I was in the opposite argument a couple of years ago, but then I saw just this little simple photograph that demonstrated that concept of copying isn't theft, and it flipped my whole worldview around. I was like, wow.
Could you describe that image, please?
Yeah, it was a picture of like some content, and it was theft, and then it removed the content out of the box, simulating something being stolen, and then it was piracy, and it was a picture of the content with another picture of the content symbolizing that it's just been copied, and the original is still there. No one has taken it from their possession. I'm pretty bad at describing images, if I say so myself.
Oh, that's all right. Well, that's okay. But what other things in the States and the status quo do you strongly disbelieve in?
Taxes. Taxation is theft is one of our big popular phrases. That's gotten some publicity. Also, I challenge the existence of police, the military, anything the government says or does. I promise you, I have something to say about it. If anyone says this is necessary, who's going to pay for the roads? I'm the first line of defense saying this is why that's crap.
Yeah, I remember a few months ago I first properly started to hear about how a minarchist or a libertarian economy and country could work. I was aware of this concept for years, at least a year and a half or 2 or so years. Certainly, and that's quite rare in the UK. We have no concept of libertarian, small government, big society, small society. It's just, here's government, who's in control, what new laws, what regulations, we need a law against this, a law against that. So there's only really an additive as opposed to a destructive or get removal kind of mentality here. I remember watching the documentary about the Constitution was not written for you. Does that sound familiar at all? The Constitution was not written for you.
Yes, actually. The Constitution was written to limit government, not to limit the people at all.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution, it lists every single power that the federal government has. There's a limited number of them, and then all the other powers, no matter what they are supposed to be reserved to the states. So, like the federal ban on marijuana is illegal. It's completely unconstitutional. That's why some of our states have started to say, it's legal in this state. Like Colorado was the first state to legalize marijuana, and they were able to do this because the federal government said it was illegal to do marijuana, which the federal government doesn't have the power to actually say. That's a state right according to our Constitution.
Yeah, and this another interview or another video actually I was watching on YouTube on Facebook even was talking about how we don't need a court system either. I didn't understand that. This is 8, 10, 12 months ago, something like that. Talking about how we don't need a court system. And we just have a third party, unbiased arbiter that knows or understands the law. But then I'm not quite sure.
That's kind of a court system, like a third party arbitration. I don't think we need a government court system at all. But
yeah, and that third party is always somebody else who's not involved at all with what's currently happening. It's always somebody else, because the argument then went, if it's the same person that's always arbitrating, then he can have dictation or control over the laws, and he's always the one. He's a bit of a dictator then. And I didn't fully understand this because I thought that the government had to play some role, like with the police and the roads and the.
Isn't that a monopoly?
Beg pardon?
That's a monopoly.
Yeah, I see that now. Yeah, but I think this is slightly before the big My Roads debate came up. I forgot who said that now. What speaker or whoever said that. But with regards to roads, what I don't personally understand is who would arrange the layout of the roads and the grid structure or the distance or the gap. How big the roads are, how wide, and all that. That's what I don't fully understand. If you got people just, let's take Lieberland, for example, more or less empty territory ready to be built on, if people decide to build a house here and there and everywhere, then the roads are going to be very much like, medieval England, where it's all over the place, there's no real structure and no order to it. Okay, that's fine, but then wouldn't a government be required to say, or some centralised authority would then say, we want a road to go along here, along there, along here, and there's also a floodplain, so consider this, and defences over there. So that I personally don't fully understand that roads argument.
Well, that's something that I don't pretend to be an expert in every different market, but that's something definitely that the free market I think would take care of. If there were a ton of businesses that found some prime real estate of this land is some great land to put companies on, then why wouldn't they build a road to another system of another area where there's a lot of companies or houses? It kind of just follows the path of least resistance and common sense of there's 48 businesses here, there's 48 businesses here, and there's no way to get to them. What do? We build a road.
Mm-hmm. I see.
If you'd like me to explain, in my opinion, how they'd be paid for, I'd be more than happy to do that for you as well. Because I've noticed a lot of people say, well, who will build the roads? And we all make jokes about it, but I hardly ever see people actually giving a concrete, solid answer. And if you'd like me to explain what I believe would be the answer to that, there's a couple different ways. There's always crowdfunding, which is, it's not exactly a good structure, but there's always crowdfunding. There's the thing I said earlier about I have a business here and there's no way to get to it. It's in my best financial interest to build a road so people can get to it. And lastly, this one's my favorite. It's paying for it with billboards and advertisements. And that's how we get free YouTube content. That's how we don't have to pay $1 every time you want to watch a TV show. They get paid by the advertisements. So I think that's a great way to build a road, is to have all these billboards and stuff.
So I'm curious then, you've heard of Lieberland, right?
Yeah, I heard about it actually just the other day.
Oh, I've known about it for a while, and it's fascinating. So
it is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on that? How do you think it would function? How do you think it would work?
To my understanding, they're still going to have a government, but I'm not 100% aware of all the facts about Lieberland.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, the government taxation is all voluntary there.
Right.
So that's pretty nice, and
that is good.
It's based on a merit system, so it's not so much a country. It's more of a company. So you pay the merit, you pay the taxes voluntary. I'm not sure what currency in, probably Bitcoin or something like that. And the more merits you have, I think the more privileges or the more access or the more something you have, or maybe, I don't know, membership, or I'm not quite sure what the rewards are, but there is an incentive to pay taxes. And what's also interesting is that the company, or the country, quote unquote, cannot take out any debt as well. So they can't borrow, or for banks or other countries. And so they have to raise all their money through services, fees, or through this taxation system. And as I remember it from the Constitution, which hasn't been ratified yet, there's no standing army. There's next to nothing with regards to laws, and the entire, it's just funded all by itself. What do you think to that? It's very minarchist, as opposed to anarcho-capitalist, and very voluntarist. But what do you think to that? What do you think to the concept of it and your understanding so far?
I think that sounds something very similar to what Ron Paul what Ron Paul would like, because he's not an anarchist, at least he doesn't say he is, but he is a voluntarist. And something he said in the 2012 election was allowing for an opt-out system, which would make participation in the United States government, the whole system, taxes, laws, all that, completely voluntary, which would be in alignment with voluntarist principles, that everything is voluntary. Sure, there's still a government, but it's still voluntary, and I think that applies to Liberland as well. If everything is completely voluntary, then that's still in alignment with voluntarist principles. It's not perfect. It's not anarcho-capitalism. I don't think it would be as successful or as prosperous as an anarcho-capitalist society, but in principle, it's still absolutely fine if there's no coercion.
And why do you think it won't be as prosperous as an anarcho-capitalist society?
I think anytime there's a government, things are going to be less prosperous. Anytime something's mandatory, prices are going to go up because they can charge whatever they want. That's why insurance is so expensive. That's why healthcare is expensive. Well, it's not the reason healthcare is expensive, but it's part of the reason is that it was mandatory here. So things that are mandatory will always be more expensive and always of lesser quality. And that applies to a minarchist society or an anarcho-capitalist society, or any society, really. If something's mandatory, it's going to be less prosperous than if it was provided in a free market.
Yeah, I see your point. I agree. This is why there's few things in the UK I'd rather not pay for. You mentioned just then Ron Paul 2012 election. One thing that fascinates me about the status quo is this whole concept of neoconservatism. So let's take all right. So you got the West in general, America, Canada, Britain, Europe, and all the rest, and the rest of the world, the East or China and BRICS nations, for example. Okay, so what is wrong with supporting the status quo by arguing and saying that if someone has to be number one in the world, not joint number one, but number one, top dog, it might as well be me. Everyone thinks the same. Every other country says it might as well be me. But as a matter of fact, America, and by extension, the West is number one as well. And then there's a whole thing of blood for oil in 2005 and all the rest. So it's like saying, well, to maintain number one, we need oil, we need a lot of resources, we consume a lot of food and things like that. So it seems to be that the cost of being number one and being top dog is that the rest of the world kowtows to us. They accept our dollar. We take all the resources. Isn't that a good thing? As an American citizen, especially, you're number one. You got this fabulous lifestyle, fabulous. I've not lived in the States, but very wealthy compared to most other countries in the world. Generally speaking, free, although that's questionable now. But you're number one.
Some restrictions may apply.
Yeah, exactly that. Batteries not included and stuff like that. Yeah. Isn't that a good thing then, by supporting the status quo and saying if someone has to be number one in the world, if someone has to be the policeman of the world, it might as well be me.
On the surface, maybe it seems like it's a good thing, but if you care about human rights and principles, then being the policeman of the world is a terrible thing. It's not authorized in the Constitution. It's not moral by any standpoints. And they don't seem to see the other argument, which is we would be better off if we weren't the policemen of the world, if we weren't spending trillions of dollars on unnecessary wars. So there's more money going into it, I think, than we're getting out of it. And even if that weren't the case, it's still principally unjust to do that. I'd rather be poor but principally aligned than rich and be a total jerk, murdering innocent people or stealing resources and gold from other countries.
You would prefer my argument to argue against myself is trade, open trade, free,
right? Exactly,
and voluntarily trade the goods for services and vice versa, as opposed to extortion and military occupation and destabilization.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then wouldn't some people also say, well, if we're not the policeman of the world, if we're not top dog, then I don't want China, communist China, or Russia, corrupt Russia, to be number one or the policeman of the world. What do you think to that?
I think if they tried to be the policeman of the world, then if we need to draw the military back into the United States, if we're going to achieve a free society, it's not going to happen overnight. So what we should do first, withdraw every troop from every country, put them in America. So if someone tries to be the policeman of the world in our absence, if it leaves some kind of, power vacuum, as they like to say, then we're prepared to defend ourselves. And if they don't mess with us, then it's not really our business. That's up to the other countries to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, and going back a tiny bit, you mentioned like human rights and all that. I remember some congressman or some senator. This is mid-2000s. There was an interview with her on CNN or something like that, and the host asked her. The host said that over 1 million Iraqis have died, and like so and so amount of children have died, and was it worth it? Was all these deaths?
I remember seeing that. Yep.
Yeah, and the woman, I forgot who it was. No idea who.
I don't remember either.
But yeah, she said yes, it was worth it. So it seems to be that the means justify the ends. And I was thinking about this recently, where the means, no matter what that is, justifies the end. As long as we get what we want, the means can be anything. And I think the opposite. Well, I think that's unjust, and I think that the means should be justified, and the ends should be justified as well.
I agree. That's kind of a problem now in America, is the alt-right versus the whoever else. They believe in the main difference between them and us as anarcho-capitalists is they are the ends justify the means people. And I disagree wholly with that. They believe in, closing down all the borders and deporting everybody and all kinds of stuff, and they don't understand what principles are. They don't understand where they came from as liberty lovers. They're no longer lovers of liberty, they're lovers of prosperity. And I actually wrote an article about that in my Steam It, which is I think the one you commented on. I don't remember. Was that the border argument or
potentially?
I wrote an article in Steam It about liberty versus prosperity, and obviously with liberty comes prosperity, but the alt-right just won't. They don't care. All they care about is prosperity and dropping communists out of helicopters, and just being pretty much fascist dictators.
Yeah, I've not had much experience with it or exposure, but it feels on the surface of it, the sense, it feels much more malicious, very troll-like behaviour, not very nice, perhaps well-intended, but not very nice. And that communist out of helicopters thing, I barely understand that. I know
that's
a historic reference.
It alludes to the Chilean dictator Pinochet, or
Yeah.
Pinochet. I don't know how to pronounce his name, to be honest, 'cause I don't really care that much. But Augusto Pinochet or whatever hated communists. He apparently loved the free market, but he was a brutal dictator who he had death squads. I don't remember what they were called. Maybe just Chilean death squads. I don't remember, but he had these death squads, and they would take people they didn't like and just drop them out of helicopters. And it started out in our society, in our community. It started out as kind of a joke that we would drop communists out of helicopters, but then it turned more serious. And with people like with Hop, he was the one with the famous physical removal, so to speak, quote. And people took that with the helicopter thing, and then that's what became of the alt-right. That's pretty much what started it, I think.
With who? Hop? Who exactly?
Hans Hermann Hoppe. He's a anarcho-capitalist.
I
think he's Austrian. I think he's Austrian. I can look it up real quick.
Well, never heard of him. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of the alt-right, what do you think to this new thing, the alt-left? Because in my opinion, of course, that exists. There's opposite. Opposite. World of duality.
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
They've always existed. They just never call themselves that. I think they're stupid as well. I mean, I don't like either side of. I mean, you know about the whole Charlottesville thing and the alt-left versus the alt-right and Antifa and the white nationalist Nazis. I think they're both morons. I think being forced to choose a side is a false dichotomy, and there's absolutely more options. I think they're both wrong. They're both exactly what they sought to destroy. and I think is ridiculous. The alt-right wants to destroy big government by becoming big government and being coercive. Antifa wants to destroy fascism by killing people they disagree with, which is fascism. So they're both what they sought to destroy, and I think they both need to take a step back and examine what they're doing and why they're doing it.
And you said that choosing a side is a false dichotomy. Can you elaborate, please?
There's absolutely more choices than to choose between Antifa and the alt-right. There's, how about we give both these people free speech, and if they start hurting people, that's when we step in. Because all the Antifa is wanting to hurt and kill Nazis for being Nazis, when in reality, the Nazis have done nothing to them. And the same thing with the alt-right. So they both need to take a step back and stop being jackasses.
Yeah, I heard that the first person to throw a punch or to enter violence is the loser automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. That is true.
Yeah, and this Hans Hermann Hoppe, what can you say about him? I'm just very curious.
I'm not a big fan. He thinks in order to have a libertarian society, the only way to do it is to physically remove all the leftists. And I think that's a load of crap. I think the only reason you should ever physically remove anybody is if, let's take for example, you own a restaurant at McDonald's. You own a McDonald's or whatever, and one of your rules is no swearing or something. You could physically remove somebody who's breaking your rules at your private establishment. Same thing goes for if somebody's trespassing on your property or someone's hurting you or something like that. You shouldn't physically remove people for having different beliefs than you. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
So you're advocating private governance?
I advocate private property. I advocate privatization of every market. It's the only way to achieve a free society.
But you gave the example of McDonald's. So if someone was swearing and breaking the rules, that the owner or the manager had the right to remove him from the premise.
Yes.
So then wouldn't someone argue that's the exact same thing with regards to the government, as Hoppe would argue?
It's not, because it's voluntary. The existence of government is not voluntary. There's nothing you can do about it. But owning a McDonald's, no one's forcing you to go to that McDonald's. You could go to a different McDonald's. It's not going to take any effort.
I see. Oh, that's the same argument with that the Christian bakery, isn't it? Then with the gay couple that wanted.
Yep. Go to a different bakery. I mean, no one should be forced to make a cake for anybody. That's ridiculous. I think it's totally ridiculous. The government can force people to make a cake.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. And
people have the right to refuse people for any reason they want. I believe, and I guess this is controversial, but if Walmart didn't want to accept black people, then they should have the right to do that. They're going to lose out a lot of money because they're going to lose out every black person that buys at Walmart, and then they're going to lose out anybody else who thinks, "Oh, wow, this is a terrible company. I'm going to boycott them," and they're going to lose like billions of dollars over it. So I believe people have the right to refuse service to anybody they want for any reason, but they have to pay the repercussions, which is facing boycotts and things like that. Bad press, bad publicity.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's one thing I've noticed about the blockchain kind of like side in the community, where it's all based on trust. It's all based on, does this person work? Is he worthwhile? Does he do the job? Is he trustworthy? Yes. And it's crowd. It's rather spontaneous in that way. It's very naturalistic. It's very tribalist, where it's like this person is worthwhile. He's trustworthy, and more people that recognise and agree with that, and the more business the person gets. It's
kind of the same thing with the a few months ago, the whole transgender bathroom thing we had going on in America, and Target actually refused to allow transgender people to use whichever bathroom they chose or preferred or whatever. And so people started boycotting Target. And as a result of that, they lost so much money that they were forced to change their policies. So people think that ethical consumerism isn't a thing and you can't change. No, it's absolutely a thing, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, it's people voting with their dollars. It's people.
Exactly. That's the only ethical way to vote is with your dollar.
Yeah, it's follow the money, and if the money river is dried up, then they're going to change it. They're going to do something to appease the customers.
Exactly. They want the most money, and it's in their financial interest to listen to their customers. So.
Yeah, and going back a tiny bit, this Hans Hermann Hoppe, you said that he advocates forcible removal of people. Now,
Right.
I agree with you. That's not right. I think the best way to go around it would be to persuade them through argument and debate, and to say, "Here's your argument. Here's their argument. What do you think? Does it match? Does it work?"
Right.
Back and forth for debate as opposed to forcible removal. Just wanted to share that idea. And so you mentioned your blog earlier on Steemit with regards to borders. What else are you working on, and what are you up to next?
I don't really ever plan my articles. I just kind of get, whenever I'm inspired, like by this whole Charlottesville incident, that's what prompted me to write Liberty versus Prosperity. So it's just if something else happens that's a really big deal, then I'll probably write an article about it if I know something about the topic. If I know absolutely nothing, like cryptocurrencies, I'm not exactly the best. I'm not exactly a subject matter expert. I don't pretend to be. So if something happens with Bitcoin, say the price crashes, that's going to suck. Like I have some money invested in Bitcoin, but I don't pretend to be an expert.
Would it be okay to talk about your views on it then? In the context of a libertarian government?
Of cryptocurrency?
Would that be okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not exactly certain what my views are in cryptocurrency. On one hand, it's completely decentralized and not traceable, which is good for black markets and gray markets and things like that. On the other hand, it's not backed by anything. So I'm still not quite sure where I stand on it. There's only a limited supply. It can't be inflated. Once it's all mined, it can't be inflated at all. So I think right now it's a good thing.
Yeah, but then wouldn't some people say that every currency is going to be used by criminals, and that criminals will find a way anyway? That's the whole nature of what they're doing. They're not going to abide by the laws, so they'll do whatever they want. Exactly,
they will. They don't care. The more laws you create, the more criminals there will be. So
yeah, exactly.
They're not gonna. If a criminal is gonna murder somebody, they're not gonna draw the line at, I better not use this illegal currency. They're gonna use whatever they want because they're criminals. It's what they do.
All right. Okay. So Donald, then, what's your view? What's your thoughts on Donald?
Donald Trump. Let's see. I mean, better him than Clinton, but other than that, I don't like him. I don't think he's a crusader for liberty. I don't think he would have been as good as somebody like Rand Paul. And that being said, I'm not a giant fan of Rand Paul either, but he would have been better than Trump. But regardless, I don't vote. Never have. I probably won't. Voting's not something I have any interest in, because I believe it's just forcing the minority population to go along with whatever your beliefs are, and I'm against that because I don't believe in force and coercion. So I don't vote. Didn't vote for Trump. Didn't vote for Clinton. Didn't vote for anybody. Never voted. And Trump's just an authoritarian like every other president we've had in the past 100 years.
Yeah, so you're part of the 47% that didn't vote.
I voted for nobody, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
If nobody would have won, nobody won the vote. The majority of people voted for nobody. So I wish nobody would have won and we would have had nobody, but that's not the case.
Yeah. But I can't help but think that the 47% didn't vote for other reasons apart from principle. Yeah. They didn't like religious reasons, or they didn't like the candidates, or they maybe the ballot box closed on time or something like that, or not registered. I feel there's a few other reasons why that. 47%, that's easily 100 or so million people that didn't really vote.
Oh, yeah.
But, so there's something I wanted to ask about something. Oh, I forgot it now. Oh, yeah. So these blogs, what have you blogged about then?
On like Steemit?
Yes.
I've only got a few articles on there. Let me check. I got the borders debate. I got the liberty versus prosperity, and those are the first articles I've actually written in like a year. I wrote. Let's see. I just wrote about anarchy in general, saying, "Is it chaos?" I wrote about the non-aggression principle. I had a pretty good article about the non-aggression principle.
So, is anarchy chaos?
It is not chaos.
Oh.
It is not chaos.
That's interesting because a lot of people have that stereotypical image of someone throwing Molotov cocktail
at a cop car. Yep.
Yeah, with like a bandana
yep.
during the day. That's anarchy.
That's anarcho-communism or libertarian socialism or whatever they call themselves nowadays. That's anarcho-communism. That's leftist anarchism. That is chaos. I'll agree with that all day. That is chaos.
But anarchism
just means no leaders. That's all it means.
Yeah, absence of rulers.
Yeah, absence of rulers, not absence of order or anything like that.
Yeah, but then surely even if the anarcho-communists are being violent, surely they have a solution. You know, is there an end game? Do you not think with them?
Maybe. I'm not sure what their end game is. I mean, they're kicking over trash cans in their violent rage. So I don't know if kicking over trash cans is step one to achieving their communist society, but I mean, some of them. I have talked to some anarcho-communists who make some sense. Like, they're not as crazy as some of them that I've seen. That they just say they believe in a moneyless, classless society. And, for example, like I said, without profits, what motive is there to have this factory that makes this product? And what one of them told me was there would be multiple factories. Like one, let's make it nice and easy for us. Let's have a shirt factory and I don't know, a hot dog factory. So if you wanted a hot dog, you would just trade in some T-shirts, and if you wanted a T-shirt, you would trade in some hot dogs. I mean, it's not as complicated as some people make it seem. So you don't always need that dollar profit motive in order to get something done. It's a great motivator. I think it's the best one there is. But these rational, logical communists don't believe that. So some of them make some sense, most of them don't.
And do you believe that? You said the dollar is a good motivator.
Absolutely. I believe capitalism is the absolute best economic system that's ever existed. It's lifted more people out of poverty than anything. And if you can actually look at the demographics, at the stats, poverty is at an all-time historical low. Same thing with violent crime. So.
Yeah, I've heard this before, that the past 40 or so years, millions and millions in Africa and China have been uplifted because of the policies of the free market.
Exactly. If you look at countries like Greece and Venezuela, and there's another one, but those countries are failing, absolutely, and that's due to Keynesian economics and socialism.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on Keynesian economics?
I think they're atrocious. I think they're absolute atrocities. Excuse me.
What do you not like about it?
I don't like that the government thinks they can determine value. They can't determine value. The free market determines value. You can't intervene in an economy and make it better.
Yeah, I don't like the emphasis on money velocity, where you're just passing money around and hope, I give you a $5 and you pass it over a million times, and suddenly we've got a net worth of $5 million. I don't like that, because that's not true wealth. True wealth is increased productivity. It's being able to justify and deserve more money coming to you through a factory, through intellectual property, sharing, all these podcasts, things like this, sharing ideas, and the values derived from that, as opposed to just being able to pass it around quickly through welfare or through taxes or things like that, just money velocity. That's why I don't like it, ideally. As well as the whole idea about smashing a window and suddenly
the broken window fallacy. Yep.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite thing about Keynesian economics is their broken window fallacy, because it's the most fun. It's the most fun to make fun of. I think it's ridiculous.
Oh. All right. So how do you make fun of it? Because the way I see that it makes sense is take post-war Japan. They had a lot of windows smashed, and yet they recovered quite well. And then in the 1980s, the Americans were worried that everything will be built in Germany and Japan. That's how I see it, but I also see that they had American aid and they had more free market, but they had a much better, freer government, Same with West Germany as well. They had a much freer government than they had before the war. What's your thoughts?
Well, post-war economic booms are common. They're nothing but bubbles, and they're nothing. It's not actual wealth. It's not actual growth in economics. Sure, there's more money going into industries, but where's the money coming from? It's not coming from voluntary transactions. It's coming from taxes. So it's going to be detrimental at the end, regardless.
If you elaborate, please.
Let's just look at the broken window fallacy as a simple whole.
Please
They instead of spending $5 to repair that window, that $5 could have went to anything else and help the economy that way. But if it's just going to keep going to the broken window, then that company, whoever owns that company that has the broken window, that they have to keep replacing it, that $5 keeps coming out of their paycheck. And then if their window gets broken enough and they keep having to pay for it, they're going to go out of business.
Yeah, I agree. But then wouldn't some people say that the window repairman gets an extra $5 for repairing it, and then he puts that into circulation? Maybe he can grow his business or invest it elsewhere.
Sure, but then a company's already gone out of business. That's a net loss for the economy. If that, let's say it's a baker for the company, whatever, it's a baker. He could have spent that $5 on, let's pretend suits are $5. He could have spent that $5 on a suit, and whoever made that suit, all the factories involved in it, all the people involved in getting the necessary materials, the people who sold it, the people who do the electricity for the building of the shop who sold it, the people who paved the parking lot, etc. All those markets would have grown. But instead, this baker had to go out of business to pay for a window that kept breaking. So it's like the it's like the video iPencil. If you haven't seen that video, I recommend watching iPencil.
iPencil.
Yep, it's a great video. There's also one on the broken window fallacy. There's a couple on the broken window fallacy that would explain it way better than me. I'm not an economist by any means.
That's all right. And with the iPencil, I remember watching a lecture by Milton Friedman talking about the pencil brings together people from all over the world, people who would otherwise be arguing and fighting, and yet to create a pencil, they have to get the lead, the rubber, and who knows what other materials.
The metal, the wood, the materials to make the shapes and to put it together and to gather the materials and the buildings and the workers and all kinds of different markets come together for that simple little writing utensil.
Is that the same as iPencil, or is that something else?
That is iPencil.
Oh, right, okay. But also I'm just very curious, because you mentioned productivity and dollars. Universal basic income. I had somebody else on the podcast a few episodes ago that was uploaded recently advocating for universal basic income. The argument was that rather than going for and aiming for full employment, they go for minimal employment or 0% employment, where automation takes up the daily lives of government and all the products and services, all the needs. And that's because we don't need people anymore, per se.
So this is post-scarcity.
Post-scarcity, all right. Yeah, yes. And they were arguing that people are alive and they have nothing to do, or they want to do things, but the income guarantees that a guaranteed income helps them to do what they want to do. What do you think to that, with universal basic income?
I think it's a waste of time. I don't think it would be beneficial at all. I think it's if everything is automated, then where does this UBI come from? If it comes from the government, how do they get the money? If everything is automatic and there are no businesses that do anything themselves, everything is done by machines, every last % of labor is done by machinery, where does the money to provide UBI even come from?
Yeah, my main quarrel with it is the government will be too big then. Because if the government's giving you income, then it's a slippery slope as to what else can they do, what else can they give away. One hand they give, other hand they take away.
One of my favorite quotes, sorry to interrupt, but one of my favorite quotes is, a government that's big enough to give you everything you've ever wanted is big enough to take away everything you've ever had.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of bringing that home in the UK, we have the National Health Service, and as of lately there's a talk about putting a tax on calories. So products, pizzas for example, that have a certain amount of calories in it will have, it cost more expensive. So it's like the government gives guaranteed healthcare, universal healthcare, but then says, oh, but by having a tax on this pizza, this calorie, it'll save the NHS a couple of £1 million a year. But then it's like, if you get rid of the NHS, the tax is gone as well. So it's like, I'll give you healthcare, but then it's I'm dictating to you what you can and what you can't eat. So you can't have calories, you can't have sugar. That's more expensive because it's an arbitrary rule. But if that NHS wasn't there, the tax wouldn't be there, and the government would not be dictating to people what they can and cannot eat.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous as well. Excuse me.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this podcast, then, Kody, what's next for you? What you're working on now?
Right now, I'm trying to work on getting my associate's degree in computer science, and actually awaiting an answer of whether I'm going to get kicked out of the Marine Corps or not. Long story. I'm waiting an answer for that. So if I do, then who knows what's next? I don't know. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing regardless of the consequences, whether it be good or bad.
That's cool. That's cool. It sounds like an interesting story about the Marine Corps.
It is.
Are you allowed to elaborate at all?
I made a comment. Actually, I sent a private Facebook message to a sailor who was trying to recruit me into the Navy, to which I told him I'm in the Marine Corps, and also taxation is theft, and the government should be dissolved. And he wasn't very happy about that. So he went and took a screenshot of our conversation, and sent it to my command, who I was in Turkey at the time on a deployment. So they kicked me out of Turkey, and now I'm pending. They investigated me and everything. Saw all my Facebook posts, even if they were set to friends only. They saw every last Facebook post. And I'm currently awaiting the commanding general, waiting his answer of whether he's going to kick me out or keep me in. So that's where I'm at right now. I've been in this limbo for 4 months now, just waiting for an answer.
I see. I understand. Interesting. So
yeah, that's all because of my beliefs, and I'm going to keep on trucking because I'm a man of principle before anything else.
Yeah, and before we go there, one quick question then, because it kind of stems from that. A lot of people would argue against the system and resist the system and try and change it from within. And I start to realise that a lot of people now take the view of forget the system, leave it, or create something that makes the system obsolete or redundant.
Right, that's
like
agorism.
Yep. Beg pardon?
That's agorism, or some people call it, or some people pronounce it agorism. I prefer agorism though. The work in black and gray markets. One of the easiest ways to explain it is, well, how do we get rid of the government? The same reason we got rid of Blockbuster. We provide a better alternative. So a lot of people I know a lot of agorists who are great people, and that's what they believe in, is just completely subverting the state. Don't go through them at all for anything, and dismantle them by competition.
And what do you think to that?
I think it's great. I think it's a great principle. I think it's very worthy, very noble principle. But I don't think that's how the government's going to go away, personally. I mean, maybe it's possible if Bitcoin is more accepted more and more people have the capabilities of providing alternatives. But I don't think that's going to be the thing that deals the final blow to the state at all.
And what do you think will?
I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure about that. What I am sure about, though, is we can't abolish it right away. There's no way to do that. I don't think a violent revolution is the way to go, because people aren't ready for that. People are still dependent on government for everything, or at least they think they are. So we need to start changing the minds of tens of millions of people before we can even come up with a good answer for that question. I believe, at least.
Yeah, I see. So, but Kody, it was great having you on the show.
Thank you. It was great being here.
What is the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
Probably my Facebook. Facebook.com/CodeRedCud. KODREDCUD.
And will that Steam it at all?
Steam it, I am on there a little bit, yeah. It's the same username, KODREDCUD. Code Red Cud.
What is it? KOD?
RED.
REDCUD.
CUD.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. I'll include this in the show notes.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you, Adrian, for having me.
So now, ladies and gentlemen at home, if you haven't already, click on the subscribe button below and press the bell notification right next to it for the latest uploads. And if you're watching this on Steemit, however, upvote, re-steam, and follow. Because either way, there's plenty more content to come. Because this channel is all about helping you become a remarkable entrepreneur. And this podcast is all about bringing stories and experiences and insights from around the world from people, whether entrepreneurs or not. So go out there today and do something remarkable. How cool is that?
Well spoken.